for others, but what about advocacy? Resources should be poured for our advocacy. Thank you very much.
That's a very relevant point you raise, and I think it also builds to the point that the three speakers were alluding to, that when we're talking about demographic dividend, it's not really the responsibility, or the complete ownership doesn't lie with just one department within one ministry, but it is really intersectoral. There's the role of education, there's the role of the skilling industry, both the public and the private sector. Then there's health, unpaid workforce, as you said, and the whole, the whole dynamics of development, right? So it's across various departments of the government, and as you rightly said, that it's not one key decision maker. We may have a lot of representatives from the ministries of health for this conference, but this spans much wider, and it's for the group of advocates in this room to go back to the countries and talk about expanding family planning and discussions around contraception and leveraging the demographic dividend to be able to solve for a range of issues for the country. But with that, I think there's a lot of food for thought to get us started on the deliberations at ICFB. So thank you very much. Thank you to this fabulous panel, and thank you to this great audience.
Wonderful. That was really, really nice. As we transit to the next panel, I'll quickly introduce myself. I am Allen Kabagenyi from Makerere University in Uganda, as one of the co-chairs of this session. So we are really excited to have each one of you here. And allow me to introduce the moderator for this second panel, which is on data monitoring tools to measure and track women's empowerment. Ms. Jamaica Coker is a program officer at Data and Evaluation in Family Planning Program at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. She is a demographer with broad experience in international population dynamics research. Her research has focused on a lot of work on fertility and family planning, specifically in sub-Saharan Africa, on migration and urbanization, and linking demography and geographic information system, GIS. She has also worked extensively in health and family planning program implementation, again in sub-Saharan Africa and in several years in DRC, that is the Demographic Republic of Congo, especially with PSI, that is Population Services International. Yes. Please, let's put our hands together to welcome Jamaica to moderate the second session. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you for the introduction. I'll ask the speakers in this panel to come up now and get prepared on the podium while I do a brief introduction. I know that we are just hitting the morning lull, but we are going to pick you up now. We do not have a rousing chant like our neighbors next door, but we do have a very exciting panel that I think will get us through to lunch and then some. As Alan said, I'm Jamaica Corker. I'm with the family planning team at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and I am a late-breaking substitute moderator for my colleague, Wynn Brown. We're sorry that he can't be here today, but I'm delighted that I am. And I'm also in the enviable position of jumping in after someone else has done all of the work and getting the opportunity to introduce and take credit for it. Panel 2 is looking at data and monitoring tools to measure and track key aspects of the demographic dividend. It is a bonus panel. It appears like there are 3 presentations. There are, in fact, 4. So this means we're going to have to be very conscious of time, asking the speakers to take less than 15 minutes each, and I will be here signaling when that time is coming to an end. And I think we'll dive right into the presentations given time constraints. Like panel one, we will hold questions to the end. So take note of anything you'd like to ask the speakers, and we'll make sure to have a question and answer opportunity at the conclusion of the session. So I will introduce speakers one at a time. We're starting with Dr. Carolina Cordona, who is familiar to everyone here because she is a co-organizer of this conference, and you probably received information and email from her. Dr. Carolina Cordona is an assistant scientist at the Johns Hopkins University, Bloomberg School of Public Health. She is a health economist focused on understanding demographic processes and their effect on economic development. She's particularly interested in the influence of women's sexual and reproductive health decisions on women's roles in society and how they shape demographic transitions. So Dr. Cordona will kick us off with her presentation on the Demographic Dividend Effort Index.
Thank you, Jamaica, and thanks everyone. So I'll be presenting some of the work that we've been conducting at the Gates Institute, where we developed this tool to track the level of efforts that countries are being put in place in order to harness the benefits of a demographic dividend. I don't see my presentation, but I do see it on this. Oh, okay, there it is. Thank you. So before I start, I'll just like to acknowledge my co-authors, John Christophe Rusatira, Michelle Martinez, Oyin Ramon, and Saifuddin Ahmed. So I won't start by saying why we care about demographic dividend, because we're all here in this conference, and we know it's an interesting and important topic. But I'm just going to start by sharing some information that, well, we know that the African Union declared that the decade of demographic dividend in 2017. And as a result of that, we've seen that many African nations have started to develop their demographic dividend roadmaps. We also know that in these roadmaps, they are mostly focused on understanding the current situation in terms of indicators that countries are in as a snapshot of their current progress. But we don't know what it is that it's behind this progress. So that's the question that we try to answer with this tool. And then the other thing to highlight is that we know that a demographic dividend needs to be worked. A country needs to invest in it. It is the results of changes in the population age structure, but it's not going to happen overnight. One needs to set the certain investments that will enable a country to harness these benefits. So there's been some institutions that have developed a lot of work in terms of understanding what are the sectors in which a country needs to invest. We have the framework from the African Union in which they've identified for different sectors that need to be prioritized. Among these, there's the labor market, education and health sectors, having a stable government, and then also empowering the youth. Then we also have another framework from Population Reference Bureau, or PRB, their 4-dividend framework, in which they identified health and education sector as being important, and also having economic and political stability. And finally, we have a third framework developed by the World Bank, which doesn't focus on sectors by itself, but rather on the stage in which the country is standing up in terms of their demographic transition. So if we're thinking in the short term, then it is prioritizing investments that can accelerate fertility transition. If we're thinking about the midterm, then we're focusing on investments that have to educate girls and empower women. And then finally, if we're thinking about the long term, then we need to think about interventions that will create jobs, productive jobs, and also will encourage people to have savings accounts and retirement accounts. So given this framework, the idea is that a demographic dividend will happen only if certain conditions are put in place, and then a country will be able to harness these benefits. So given that background that we need to set up this favorable policy environment, the tool that we're presenting here today, it's Demographic Dividend Effort Index, and it is focusing on identifying and measuring the perception of national experts about the level of effort that is being placed in a country in order to harness a demographic dividend across the different most of the tools that we know of. I don't know what happened. Okay, we're back. Okay, and if we think about the right-hand side, is where we currently have most tools developed. We can think about dashboards that have been developed that are keeping track of indicators. We can think of the total fertility rate, labor work participation, the modern contraceptive prevalence rate. But the question that we're trying to answer comes on the other side, on the left-hand side. We have these outputs, but we know that change doesn't happen overnight. We need to invest in those changes. So in this tool, what we're trying to measure is the level of efforts that are being placed in these sectors that will allow countries to harness a demographic dividend. So we can think of them as inputs. So it's, we surveyed a group of experts. It was a purposive sampling survey in which they were experts in terms of policies, programs, and interventions across different sectors. So they would rank a country's efforts across the different sectors that we have. So yeah, we're focusing on the left-hand side of this diagram. And I'd also like to acknowledge that for this project, we received funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the UNFPA country offices of Uganda and the Philippines. So this is the framework that we followed for our tool, which resulted from a literature review. And I just want you to focus that we've identified 6 sectors, which are very similar to the other frameworks that we've seen from the African Union and PRB. We have the labor market, family planning, maternal and child health, education, and women's empowerment, and also governance and economic institutions. So this is the basis for the development of our questionnaires. And then for the development of our questionnaires, we based our questionnaires on existing tools, because this notion of measuring effort is not new. It has been out there. And I think the tool that we're most familiar with is the Family Planning Effort Index. So for the family planning sector, we reprinted the questionnaire from the Family Planning Effort Index. And then for the other sectors that you can see in this table, we've also looked at literature of other effort indices that were out there. And in the event that we didn't have an effort index, we've also adapted other monitoring tools, and we've also conducted a literature review for the development of the questionnaire. So you can see that family planning is the sector that has the most questions with 112, and education the one with the least number of questions with 61. This was an online questionnaire that we've implemented across 7 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. In the event that the online survey did not work, because in some countries we had some issues, we also had a paper-based. In each of the countries, we partnered with one local institutions, and today we're going to hear more about the experience of Uganda from Dr. Jotham later on. And in the case of Uganda, we partnered with the National Population Council, and the other institutions are listed here for the other countries. In each of the countries, this was a purposive sampling. We could not expect to have a large number of participants because they need to be experts in their sector. So the sample ranged from as low as 54 in Rwanda to as high as 105 in Uganda. In addition, we've also conducted, once we collected the data, we did an internal validation of the tool, because we are developing this questionnaire, but we need to assess if it's actually measuring what it purports to measure. And we did an internal validation by conducting a confirmatory factor analysis and Cronbach alphas analysis that I'm not presenting because of time, but just so you are aware that we did that. So to summary on some of the results that we found, this is the total score from the effort index across the 7 countries that we've collected data. So you can see that we can think of 3 typologies here, where we have the case of Ethiopia, Kenya, and Nigeria, in which they had a score that it's a bit more than 6. And then Rwanda is the highest score in terms of efforts, where it ranked almost at 8 points. And then we have the case of Senegal, Tanzania, and Uganda with a total score above 6. I won't go into the details of each of the countries because we don't have enough time, so I'm just picking up some examples. So here's the case of Uganda. And if you remember of the framework that we saw earlier, it was structured around 6 sectors. So we can compute each of the scores for each of the sectors. And something I should have mentioned is that the experts were experts in their sector, and they've only completed the questionnaire that corresponded to their sectors. They did not complete other questionnaires, just their sectors. So we can see that in the case of Uganda, and most of the other countries look alike, there is variation in terms of the level of efforts that are being scored across the different sectors. So in the case of Uganda, we have that economic institutions received the highest ranking total score, and then the lowest came from